Well, that's great. So if we come to teenagers of today, and your thoughts, your views on today's teens.
Those are the ones I meet are the ones in Tesco's at lunchtime, and I try to avoid it because some of them they come in like the tide, and you have to get out of the way, and unless you want to be swamped. But and coming back, when I'm coming back with my shopping basket on wheels, now I walk along with my head down, not looking, and expect them to go around me, because otherwise I'd be jumping out of their way all the time, because they're coming, you know, 3 and 4 together along the pavement. But we weren't a bit, you know, ashamed of wearing second-hand clothes in those days, and I gather that it's not done at all these days. Everything has to be new, even in families. But that wasn't so all those years ago during the war. We had to make do and mend,
and I try to avoid, if I can, the what I call the oncoming tide.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
I know the feeling.
Because it is rather difficult, 3 abreast. I think they're very privileged young people compared to the education that was available for me. So many of them have the opportunity to go to university, which was only for the very few privileged people when I was a teenager. I think many of them are kind and caring. I suppose the ones I meet in the church are the ones I know the best. And they do all kinds of things in community work. But I'm sure from the grammar school you have a programme in the community. And I have a feeling that you came down in pairs at one time to help in the coffee centre. And the girls we had, I was working in the coffee centre then, and the girls we had to help us were always very friendly, very polite, and very thoughtful. Sometimes I think about the clothes they wear, of course, and I'm glad to see that a lot of them nowadays wear long, warm-looking tights. I think that's a great sign of them being sensible. But I think on the whole, they do reflect the attitudes of the community around them.
They do seem to be rather aloof, and I'm not surprised. I can remember, as I was saying, I can remember just wanting to be on our own. I don't remember having any long-term ambitions and relating to older people for advice or anything. I don't hold them in awe or anything. I mean, I always remember some very wise person who of my own age. We were more or less laughing at the way our music keeps getting rediscovered, the music of the 60s and 70s, and him saying, you'll realise when they've invented their own music because you'll loathe it. And I suppose I did. Rap, I remember, was the first time I realised that what he'd said all that time ago was perfectly true. But David can keep his heavy metal stuff, I must say. I've tried, but no, there's nothing there.
These children are coming up, and how many of them are going to finish up with a good living, a good pension? I have a remarkable pension, but, well, annuity actually is one I bought. But how many of these other people, just throw it forward for 30 years, and what are they going to do? I'm not jealous of what they got, but I pity the teenager of today. I knew once I had a trade, I could go anywhere and get a job. I could get a job. In fact, I never was out of work for one day in all my life. Not one day. And if I wanted to change that job, I could get 3 others offering me a job. Now, today's teenager is not going to have that. And they've got so much competition.
That's the biggest difference I can't grapple with now, is the change in morality and the strict code in which I was brought up. You do as I say and not as I have done. It's hard to generalise. I mean, I see your children going around Ilkley and they're well behaved, and I can see very decent children, but Ilkley's a skewed population, very skewed. It's not got the social problems that the bigger housing estates in Leeds and Bradford have. It's the whole business of things changing, you know, nipping off at night to smoke cannabis, or I can't understand that. People of my generation are the perpetrators innocently of this, because things started to change about 1963, and that was at the time my first two children were born. And the strain that we've had is that I kept within my morality, my code, what my grandmother and my mother expected of me. Not necessarily what my father, it was the women that were dominant and controlled, in my case anyway. About 1963, where there was this emancipation, first with the birth control pill. There were things changing rapidly, like the death penalty went in I think 66. The whole society just started to move in another direction. But there were many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, was the fact that the birth control pill was put into the public domain at that point. At that point, anything could happen. And from then onwards, I can look back on my life and see that things have just got changed and changed and changed. Till now, I'm no longer shocked by what's on television, because television had the strict BBC enunciations, and the programmes were put out in a level that there was control over it. Now, even BBC, anything goes. And when you get old in your life, and I'm, 76 now, you sort of say, well, I can't handle this anymore. I do not understand it. It's almost, and I don't hate to say this, but it's almost an apathy comes over you, because you haven't been able to change. You've done, when your own children who you've brought up within the strict codes of discipline that was stemmed from Victorian households and were carried through the early part of the century, and they suddenly change, and you find your grandchildren, you have to shift. But understanding them, I find difficult. I know my wife does the same. But we live as a family, but I still don't understand some of the motivations that go on within the social context.
I'm sure they're not all the same at all. I know a few of my own family, nieces, for example, and I think they're smashing. I think that they're very open about what they do, and that if they don't feel like being polite or anything, they can be very sulky or something like that. I know another little girl who's about 15. I know well now. You'd think she was the most charming thing on earth when she comes to talk to me. She's really, really nice. But I've heard really horror stories about how she talks to her mum and all that. And I think, like I've thought about teenagers, that no matter how they treat you at home, sometimes you're horrible to your mother or to people they know well, as long as they really do know how to behave the way out of doors. I don't think teens en masse are horrible. I'm not threatened. The only press that a lot of teenagers get is bad press, even though the good behaviour at the university march and all that, but wasn't recorded, I think there's good and bad middle-aged people, oldies and teens. I really do think that, and I was so pleased, particularly about your things, all the positive stuff about your kids in the paper. That, I think locally, probably on a national level, they're not properly reported, but at a local level in the papers, good stuff is reported on young people.
I think most of them that I've met have been very polite, but the only thing is, you see, round here, I don't think you get a lot of bad teenagers. It's just medias and things where you hear of these things. I think they have too busy a life and fast than we had. We were quiet, but with all this computers and, you know, mobiles and everything. They do such a lot. And today there's such a lot of drugs and things that we never heard of. The only thing that I always object to is if I meet any of the children out talking loud and swearing. I just can't bear swearing. We weren't ever allowed to swear. If you said damn, that was very bad. I couldn't say that.
I didn't like swearing. Don't like it now. It revolts me. Bad language is totally unnecessary. Mind you, you used to get it in your work, but that was amongst men, you see. But when you find ladies and children swearing openly and using all these bad words, I think it's a bad influence. But a lot of the American stuff, they talk so fast that it just goes in one ear and out the other. And a lot of the American stuff, they talk so fast that it just goes in one ear and out the other. And generally I find that I get on well with teenagers.